management. For each, I noted my access level and what I could do. As the designated administrator, I had the right to suspend everything for a security review, a clause my father had approved without reading. I reread my grandmother's will. It was clear. The library at the Lake Champlain property is bequeathed to my granddaughter Charmaine Wilson for her lifetime use, to remain intact as a place of learning and reflection. The renovation violated this. Legally, by 9 p.m., my emotions were steady, my plan was solid. I wouldn't act from anger, though I was furious. I wouldn't seek revenge, though I could. I would simply stop protecting them from their own consequences, while standing up for my legal rights. I ate pasta mechanically, reviewing outcomes. They would be angry, they would threaten, they might fake remorse, but decades of history said they would never truly change. After dinner, I called Vanessa Hargrove's office and left a detailed message. I emailed my boss requesting 2 personal days. I emailed my therapist asking for an emergency session. I needed to take care of myself at 11 p.m. I logged into the master dashboard. First, I disabled automatic payments on all family credit cards. The cards would still work, but the safety net was gone. Next, I changed the investment account security to require dual authentication, effectively freezing them. For the checking accounts, I removed the overdraft protection I'd set up. Nathan's secret credit cards would be the first to feel the pinch when his payments failed. Finally, I wrote to the family attorney, "Dear Mr. Steinberg, regarding the planned renovation of the Lake Champlain property. As a partial owner, I have not approved these plans, which include demolishing the library space protected in Elise Wilson's will attached. Please advise the contractors to cease work immediately, pending legal review. I have copied the county permitting office. I have retained separate counsel. Please direct future communications to Vanessa Hargrove at Hamilton Legal Partners. Regards, Charmaine Wilson." I sent it, copying the contractor and Vanessa. As midnight approached, I took the final step. A short, factual email to my parents and brother. I am stepping back from management of family financial affairs, effective immediately. Security protocols have been updated. I have addressed the legal issues with the Vermont property through appropriate channels. I will be unavailable for direct communication for the foreseeable future as I reassess my relationship with this family. Charmaine, I clicked send. I logged out of everything. I turned off my phone. The notifications would start soon. But for the first time in years, the weight was lifting. In its place was something quiet. Profound, the beginning of freedom. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. I felt lighter. I did my routine with purpose, coffee, stretching, meditation, small acts that grounded me in my life. At 8 a.m., I turned on my phone. 17 missed calls, 20, 3 texts, 9 voicemails. I ignored them all and called Vanessa's office. Her assistant had already scheduled an emergency consultation for 9:30. "I'll need all documentation," the assistant said. "Already compiled." I assured her I'd spent the early hours organizing everything. Before leaving, I took more security steps, changed my personal passwords, removed family as emergency contacts, withdrew $4,000 cash from my savings. I knew this could get messy. Vanessa Hargrove's office was on the 14th floor. She was composed, confident, her gray suit impeccable, her handshake firm. "Jordan speaks highly of you," she said, gesturing to a chair. He mentioned complex family finances and property. For an hour, I laid it out with clinical detail. Vanessa asked sharp questions, taking notes based on this. She concluded, "Your position is legally sound. The library is protected. Your administrator access was formally granted. The question is, what do you want?" 3 things, I said. 1. Protect my legal rights to the Vermont property. 2. Complete separation from their finances without being the scapegoat. 3. Immunity from any false accusations once they discover Nathan's gambling. Vanessa nodded. "Reasonable, I recommend. Legal notices on the property, formal resignation as administrator with a full accounting, and preemptive documentation of Nathan's withdrawals to protect you." "How fast?" I asked. Preliminary documents this afternoon. The property injunction is priority. After leaving, I went to a new bank and opened an account. I transferred most of my money, leaving minimal funds in any account linked to my family. By noon, my phone had 30 more missed calls. I listened to one voicemail from my father. "What the hell do you think you're doing? Fix this now. Your behavior is unacceptable." His familiar, demanding tone. For the first time, it had no power over me. At 1 p.m., I saw my therapist, Dr. Caroline Reed. "This is significant boundary work," she observed. "How are you handling it?" Between relief and guilt, I admitted. "I know this is self-protection, but the conditioning runs deep. The guilt is programmed." Dr. Reed said, "Your family installed those buttons precisely to stop you from doing this." I spent the afternoon with Vanessa's team, signing affidavits, reviewing legal notices. By 5 p.m., we had filed an emergency injunction against the cabin renovations, formally resigned me as financial administrator with full documentation, sent certified letters to all financial institutions, secured evidence of Nathan's gambling, hired a security company to change my locks and install cameras. What should I expect? I asked Vanessa. Escalation, then negotiation, she said matter-of-factly. "They'll try to intimidate you first. When that fails, they'll offer deals to regain control. They'll try to bypass your security." She was right. By evening, Nathan's texts turned threatening. "You have no idea what you're doing. Dad's considering legal action. Fix this now before it's too late." I didn't reply. I contacted my office security, telling them not to let my family in. I warned my apartment building manager. I even called the local police non-emergency line to document the situation. That night, I performed a ritual of reclamation. I deleted the family calendar from my phone. No more obligatory birthdays. I unsubscribed from my mother's country club newsletter. I took down the family photos in my living room and put up art I actually loved. Each small act strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just financial. It was emotional emancipation. The next morning, Nathan called from a new number. The credit card company declined my payment. He said, "No hello. I need 30,000 by tomorrow, or there will be problems." "What kind of problems?" "Casino markers." He admitted after a pause, "Look, I know you're upset about Mom, but this is serious. These aren't people you mess with." "Your gambling debts aren't my responsibility," I replied. "You disabled the payments," he shouted. "You did this on purpose." I resigned after being told my involvement wasn't wanted. I said evenly, "The transition has consequences. Dad is furious. He can't access the investments. Mr. Phillips at First National can help him. I provided all documentation." "This isn't a game, Charmaine," Nathan warned. "You're destroying the family." "The family was destroying me," I replied, and I ended the call. Within the hour, my father's lawyer called Vanessa. They demanded immediate restoration of access in exchange for discussing my concerns about the cabin. Vanessa told them access was changed as part of my formal resignation. Regarding the cabin, she informed them construction must cease immediately due to the injunction, which had already been served. By the third day, the anger shifted to bargaining. My mother sent an uncharacteristic email. "Perhaps my words at brunch were hasty. Family disagreements are normal, but should be resolved within the family. Please call so we can discuss restoring the accounts and moving forward." I forwarded it to Dr. Reed. "Classic minimization," she wrote back. "The apology is vague, acknowledges no specific harm, and immediately demands something. Don't respond." I didn't. I focused on rebuilding my life without their constant drain. Each day felt like recovering strength after a long illness. The first month was a blur of legal steps and personal healing. My family cycled through the stages: anger, threats, bargaining, fake reconciliation. Nathan felt the consequences hardest. Without family money, his debts came due. He had to sell his condo, move to a cheap apartment. His Mercedes got repossessed. My father reportedly paid over $100,000 to cover his casino markers. My parents faced their own humiliations. Credit cards got declined at social events. My father had to actually talk to bankers to regain access. My mother's country club membership got suspended over a late fee. The Vermont cabin became a legal nightmare. County inspectors found code violations and missing permits. Construction stopped indefinitely. My parents faced fines. I kept my boundaries strict. All communication went through Vanessa. I changed my phone number and email. I only gave my new contacts to trusted friends. My work life flourished. Freed from constant family demands, I finished a major project early and got recognized. I accepted a speaking gig at a tech conference I'd always said no to. My friends, Sophia Jordan, formed a protective circle. Other friends I'd neglected reconnected. Happy I was suddenly available. You seem different. My friend Alexis said over dinner, 6 weeks after the brunch. More present, I'm learning to live without constant vigilance. I explained. Around the 2-month mark, Nathan escalated. He showed up at my work. Security turned him away. He left handwritten notes at my old apartment, getting more desperate. Please help me. I know I have a problem. I need your expertise. For the first time, he admitted his addiction. Though mostly to get my help, my parents tried different tactics. My father used business connections to pressure me. My mother spread rumors that I was having a breakdown. We're giving her space, she told people, recasting my boundaries as instability. 3 months after the brunch, I got a call from the Vermont town clerk. We've had inquiries about selling the cabin property, she said. As co-owner, your signature is required. I wanted to confirm you knew. I didn't. Apparently, with the renovation stuck, my parents were trying to sell it out from under me. Vanessa filed more legal notices. They can't sell without your consent, she assured me. This is a pressure tactic. The next day, an email from my father. The cabin situation is untenable due to your obstruction. We have a buyer offering $7 million. Your share would be substantial. Contact me to discuss if you want to be included. The threat was clear. Cooperate or get cut out. Vanessa said it was an empty threat. They couldn't legally do it. I didn't respond. 4 months in, financial reality forced change. Nathan, now attending Gamblers Anonymous, got a real job at an insurance company. My father, facing investment losses without my management, downsized his company and sold a Florida vacation home. My mother left 2 charity boards, unable to keep up with the expected donations. I kept healing, therapy, meditation. I took a pottery class I'd always wanted to try. I started dating casually, no longer dreading the family interrogations. 5 months in, my mother ambushed me at a charity event. You look well, she said, intercepting me. She'd lost weight. Her outfit was last season. Thank you. I said neutrally, I need to get back to my table. This separation has gone on long enough, she said as if I hadn't spoken. Your father and I are prepared to forget recent unpleasantness. Nathan's better. The family needs to reunite. I'm not available for that discussion. We're still your family, she insisted, an edge in her voice. You can't erase 35 years of history. I'm not erasing history, I replied. I'm finally honoring it by responding appropriately. I walked away. She left the event soon after. The 6th month brought a surprise. Nathan contacted Vanessa, asking for a mediated meeting without our parents. After talking with Dr. Reed, I agreed with strict rules. Nathan looked different. No designer clothes. No expensive watch. The entitlement was gone. Thank you for seeing me, he began. I know you have no reason to trust me. Why are you here? I asked. He put a 6-month sobriety chip on the table. Gamblers Anonymous. Not my first try, but the first one sticking. Congratulations, I said and meant it. Hitting bottom was necessary, he continued. When you stopped enabling us, everything fell apart. Dad had to face his company was overleveraged. Mom had to see her social life was built on money, and I had to admit I'm an addict. Why tell me this? Because you were right, he said simply. About everything, none of us would have changed without what you did. I'm not asking for money or help or forgiveness. I just thought you should know that your actions forced growth, at least for me. We talked for half an hour. He told me about his recovery, his new job, his studio apartment. He didn't ask about my life or try to get promises. As we ended, he said something that hit me hard. I always knew you were the strongest one of us, he said. I just never understood that your kind of strength was the one that actually mattered. I didn't promise future contact, but said I'd consider it if he stayed in recovery. It was the first family interaction in months that didn't leave me feeling drained. Our parents didn't change. When they heard about the meeting, they sent a reunification plan. That was just me giving up and going back to work. My mother left a voicemail. Now that tempers have cooled, we can put this misunderstanding behind us. I saved it all as evidence. Their refusal to see the truth proved my boundaries were still needed. 6 months after that brunch, I was at a turning point. The legal fights were mostly over. My work was thriving. My friendships were deep. I was finally building a self that felt real. The path wasn't clear, but for the first time, that felt like freedom, not fear. I had learned hard lessons. That family is about respect, not blood. That boundaries aren't punishments, they're protections. That financial strings always come with emotional chains. That healing starts when you stop lying to yourself. Most of all, I learned that my worth isn't something they get to vote on. It's mine, and I decide. A year passed. I turned 36. I celebrated with friends at a beach restaurant. No awkward family dinner. Sophia got my favorite seafood. Jordan brought my actual favorite cake. People celebrated me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. Therapy with Dr. Reed moved from crisis to deep healing. We worked on myself, worth, the family conditioning, building a life on my own terms. Healing isn't linear, Dr. Reed reminded me. There will be bad days, guilt, longing. That doesn't mean you failed. My career kept growing. I got promoted to Director of Financial Security Systems. The irony wasn't lost on me. Around 14 months after the brunch, I ran into my father at a tech conference. We stood there, frozen. He'd aged. His confidence was still there, but new lines were on his face. His hair wasn't perfectly done. Charmaine, he nodded. Richard, I said, using his first name, you're presenting tomorrow. He noted, looking at my speaker badge. Yes, a panel on financial security infrastructure. Silence. Your brother's doing better, he finally said. 1 year sober next month. I know, we speak sometimes. This surprised him. Nathan had kept our talks private. Your mother would like to hear from you, he said, the old expectation in his tone. That would require her to acknowledge past patterns and commit to change. I replied evenly. He stiffened. Families disagree, Charmaine. Holding grudges helps no one. This isn't about grudges. It's about harmful patterns. But this isn't the time or place. Someone came over and greeted me, ending the conversation. My father nodded curtly and walked away. His disapproval used to crush me. Now I just saw it as a pattern, an ineffective one. The cabin situation finally ended. With the renovation blocked and my share protected, my parents offered to buy me out. After negotiation, I agreed. I used part of the money to buy a small cottage on a lake in New Hampshire. It had windows overlooking the water and walls of bookshelves. My sanctuary, my relationship with Nathan grew slowly. Our monthly coffees became a space for real connection without our parents there. He stayed sober. He rebuilt his life with accountability. I dream about gambling almost every night. He told me once, my therapist says that's normal. The pathways in your brain take years to rewire. What helps when the urge comes? I asked, remembering the consequences. Not just the money, who I became, the lies. The person I don't want to be again. That self-awareness was a profound change. Our relationship would never be simple, but it was becoming real. My mother couldn't evolve. She tried indirect messages, social media, public accidental meetings. The message was always the same. Return to the old patterns. I held my boundaries. At a wedding 18 months after the brunch, I was cordial but distant. You look thin, she said, criticism as concern. Are you eating? I'm well, thank you. This has gone on long enough, she declared, voice low. People are talking. It reflects poorly on the family. Appearances, always appearances. I'm not estranged. I corrected calmly. I'm establishing healthy patterns. By cutting off your own mother. Her voice was the perfect wounded tone, by requiring mutual respect as a condition for a close relationship. She shook her head, unable to process it. You always were difficult. No, I said with total clarity. I was always clear about my needs and boundaries. You called that difficult because it wasn't convenient for you. The interaction ended there. It confirmed what I knew. People can change, but not everyone chooses to. 2 years after that brunch, I sat on 2 years. It feels like a lifetime and also just a blink. I was sitting on the dock of my New Hampshire cottage, watching the sunset paint the water in fiery colors, and I realized the constant hum of anxiety in my chest was just gone, replaced by a quiet, steady hum of peace. I had built a life, a real one, not the one I was assigned, but the one I chose. But life, as it turns out, isn't a straight line from broken to fixed. Healing is a spiral. You circle back to the same old pains, but each time you're viewing them from a higher place, with a little more strength, a little more clarity. The first sign that the past wasn't quite done with me came about 2 weeks after that peaceful evening on the dock. It was a Tuesday. I was leading a project retrospective at work when my personal cell phone, which I keep on silent during meetings, lit up with a number I didn't recognize, but with a Vermont area code. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, a voicemail notification popped up. I almost deleted it, assuming it was a contractor following up on some minor work at the cabin. But something, maybe intuition, maybe just the ghost of old obligations, made me listen. The voice was older, raspier than I remembered, but unmistakable. It was Arthur, the longtime caretaker of the Wilson family properties, the man who'd taught me how to skip stones on Lake Champlain when I was 7. Miss Charmaine. The message began, his voice hesitant. It's Arthur. Arthur Flynn. I hope it's all right, I'm callin'. I got your number from the town clerk, told her it was about a property matter, which I suppose it is. It's about your father, Miss Charmaine. I saw him up at the big cabin last weekend and, well, he didn't look right, not right at all. He was out by the dock, just staring at the water, and he seemed lost. I'm worried about him. I know there's history. But I thought you should know. The message ended. I sat in my sleek modern office, the whiteboard covered in agile sprint notes, and felt the past reach out and tap me on the shoulder. It wasn't a dramatic pull, not a demand. It was a quiet, worried whisper from a good man. He seemed lost. I didn't call Arthur back immediately. I sat with the information, let it settle. My father, Richard Wilson, the titan of industry, the man who commanded boardrooms, was described as lost by a man who didn't use words carelessly. A part of me, the old, wounded part, wanted to dismiss it. Let him be lost. He was never there for you when you were. But the person I was becoming, the one who had found her own footing, felt a flicker of something else. Not obligation, curiosity, and a detached, clinical pity. I mentioned it to Dr. Reed in our next session. A part of you feels compelled to investigate, she observed. I feel like I'm being a detective about my own family. I admitted, shaking my head, it's not about re-engagement, it's about understanding the full picture. For my own closure, that's a healthy distinction, she said. Re-engagement would be stepping back into the old dynamic. Seeking understanding for your own narrative is part of the healing process. Just be mindful of the difference. So I called Arthur back. I heard the relief in his voice. Oh, thank you for calling back, Miss Charmaine. I didn't want to overstep. You're not, Arthur. I appreciate you calling. Can you tell me more? His story unfolded slowly. My father had been visiting the Vermont cabin alone about once a month, not for parties or to entertain, just by himself. Arthur said he'd see him sitting in the very library that had caused so much legal strife, just staring at the shelves, now half empty since my parents had moved a lot of the books to storage during the failed renovation. He wasn't working on his phone. He wasn't making calls. He was just there. It's the quiet that worries me. Arthur said, your father, he was always a man of action. Bustling, now he's just. Still, I thanked him and hung up. The image wouldn't leave me, Richard Wilson being still. It was antithetical to his entire being. Around the same time, my monthly coffee with Nathan took a new turn. He was coming up on his 2 year sobriety anniversary, and the change in him was profound. Jittery, entitled man from the brunch was gone, replaced by someone quieter, more grounded. Dad's retiring, he said, stirring his latte. I almost choked on my tea. Retiring, he's Richard Wilson, he doesn't retire. He just acquires smaller companies to pass the time. I know, it's weird. The Westfield deal falling through was a bigger blow than he let on. The company's stable, but it's not the empire it was. I think managing it without you in the background, it took a toll he didn't expect. The pieces were fitting together, the failed deals, the downsizing, the selling of assets. My father's identity was his business. Without its roaring success, who was he? How's he handling it? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Badly, Nathan said bluntly. He and Mom, they're not doing great. They've been fighting, a lot, about money, about the past, Mom's. Well, you know Mom. She's not handling the shift in social status well. She blames him, he blames. Well, I think he blames himself, but he'd never say it. He looked at me, his gaze clear and direct. He asks about you sometimes. That surprised me. What does he say? Not much. He'll just grunt, you still talking to your sister, and when I say yes, he just nods. It's his way of asking. He won't ever pick up the phone himself. His pride won't let him, but I think the wall you built, Charmaine. He finally ran into it, and he has no idea how to get around it. He's never had to before. I left that coffee with a heavy heart, but not a broken one. I felt a strange sense of vindication mixed with sorrow. They were experiencing a fraction of the powerlessness they'd made me feel my whole life, but it didn't feel good, it just felt true. The next nudge came from an unexpected source, my mother, not directly, of course. That would require a level of humility she didn't possess. It came via a formal, cream-colored envelope addressed to me in her flawless, looping cursive, a relic from another era. Inside was an invitation, not a demand, not a imperious text, a physical printed invitation. Elaine Wilson requests the pleasure of your company for a small family gathering to celebrate Nathan's 2 years of sobriety at the Lakeside Residence, Vermont, Saturday. The 18th, 5 o'clock in the evening. I stared at it. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression and strategy. It was for Nathan, making it very difficult to refuse without looking like I was rejecting his recovery. It was at the Vermont cabin, the site of our legal war, a subtle power play, and it was a small family gathering, a phrase that carried the weight of every holiday I'd ever endured. My first instinct was a hard, fast no. I drafted a polite text to Nathan. So proud of you. Can't make it that weekend, but let's celebrate just us the week after. But I didn't send it. I sat with the invitation. I showed it to Dr. Reed. I showed it to Vanessa, my lawyer, who dryly remarked, well, it's not a legal summons. You are under no obligation. But the question wasn't about obligation anymore. It was about readiness. Was I strong enough to walk back into that space, not as the desperate daughter seeking approval, but as an observer, as a guest in what was, legally and emotionally, no longer my home? Would it mean for you to go? Dr. Reed asked. It would feel like closing a loop. I said slowly, the realization dawning as I spoke. I left that brunch 2 years ago feeling like I was running for my life. What if I walked back in, on my own terms, just to prove to myself that I could, that they have no power over me anymore? That is a powerful motivation, she acknowledged, but be very clear with yourself about your intentions. Are you going to prove something to them or to yourself? The latter is healthy. The former will only lead to disappointment. The decision crystallized for me during a quiet walk around the lake by my cottage. The air was crisp, the water perfectly still. I felt solid. I felt like me. I realized I wasn't the same person who had fled that brunch. That woman was shattered. Acting out of sheer survival, I was now whole, and whole people can afford to be curious. They can afford to be kind, not out of weakness, but from a position of unshakable strength. I called Nathan. I got the invitation. I said, he sighed, yeah. Look, you don't have to come. I know what Mom's doing. I told her it was a bad idea. I'm coming. I said, silence, you are. Yes, for you and for me, but you need to know the rules. I will be civil. I will be polite. I will not discuss finances, the lawsuit, or the past. I am a guest, that's it. If Mom or Dad try to start something, I will wish you a happy anniversary and I will leave. No drama. I just leave, okay, he said, and I could hear the shock in his voice. Okay, that's fair. Thank you, Charmaine. It would mean a lot to have you there. The week before the gathering was a test of my newfound peace. The old anxiety tried to creep back in. I found myself mentally rehearsing conversations, preparing defenses. I had to consciously stop myself. You are not going into battle, I'd repeat. You are attending a party as a guest. You can leave. The day of, I dressed with deliberate care. I chose a simple, elegant navy blue wrap dress. It was understated but expensive, the kind of thing that said I had taste, but wasn't trying to impress anyone. I drove the 2 hours to Vermont with my windows down, listening to loud music, breathing in the pine-scented air. Pulling up to the cabin was surreal. It looked the same, the sprawling wooden structure, the majestic lake behind it, but it felt different. It was no longer the fortress of my childhood, nor the site of a legal dispute. It was just a house, a very nice house on a lake. I saw Nathan first, waiting on the porch. He gave me a quick, genuine hug. You came. I said I would. He lowered his voice, just a head up. It's tense in there. Mom is in full hostess mode, which means she's brittle. Dad's in his study. He's been in there most of the day. I took a deep breath, okay? Let's go in. The interior was both familiar and alien. The furniture was rearranged. There were gaps where books used to be, but the smell was the same. Mold wood, lemon polish, and a faint hint of my mother's perfume. My mother stood in the living room, arranging a platter of canapes. She turned as we entered. For a split second, I saw her mask slip. I saw a raw, unvarnished shock. Then the socialite slammed back into place. Charmaine, she said, her voice a careful, neutral tone. You're here. Hello, Mother. I said, equally neutral. The cabin looks. Well, an awkward silence hung between us. There was no air kiss, no false affection. Nathan, darling, she said, turning to him, could you check on the wine? I think it's breathing enough. He nodded and slipped away, leaving us alone. We stood there, two strangers who shared dîner. Thank you for coming, she said finally, not meeting my eyes. It's good for Nathan. I'm here for Nathan. I confirmed, my tone pleasant but firm. She nodded, her hands fluttering nervously. This was new. Elaine Wilson was never nervous. She was commanding or she was critical. This uncertainty was a side I'd never seen. Your father is in his study, she said. Almost as a challenge, I'm sure I'll see him later. I replied, not taking the bait. I moved past her into the main room. It was just the four of us, no everyone who matters. Just the core family unit, fractured and reassembled in this strange new configuration. A few minutes later, my father emerged from his study. He looked older than he had at the conference. Thinner, the commanding presence was diminished. He saw me and stopped. Charmaine, he said, his voice a low rumble. Father. He gave a single curt nod. That was it. The grand reunion, the gathering, was the most surreal experience of my life. We sat in the living room making painfully stilted small talk. The weather, the drive, the local news. We were like actors in a play where everyone had forgotten their lines. Nathan carried the conversation valiantly, talking about his job, his sponsor, his plans. My mother kept trying to steer the conversation toward normalcy, as if the last 2 years hadn't happened. The Henderson's daughter is getting married at the club next month. She mentioned, a lovely affair, I'm sure. No one responded. My father was mostly silent, nursing a scotch. He watched me, not with anger, but with a deep, unsettling curiosity, as if I were a complex business report he couldn't quite decipher. During a lull, he cleared his throat. Nathan tells me you were promoted, director. It was the first time he had acknowledged my career without a dismissive qualifier. Yes, I said, about a year ago. He nodded slowly. The financial security sector is robust, it is. I agreed, and that was the extent of it. But it was a crack, a tiny, almost imperceptible crack in the granite wall between us. The evening progressed without major incident. There was no screaming, no accusations, no tears. In a way, The quiet tension was more exhausting. It was like holding a heavy weight perfectly still. As the sun began to set, painting the lake in familiar shades of orange and purple, I knew it was time to go. I'd done what I came to do. I'd faced them and I had remained whole. I stood. Nathan, congratulations again. I'm so incredibly proud of you. I gave him a real hug. I turned to my parents. Mother, Father, thank you for having me. My mother looked startled. You're leaving so soon. I have a long drive, I said pleasantly. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the reason. My father stood up. I'll walk you out. This was unexpected. Nathan and my mother exchanged a glance. He walked with me to my car, the gravel crunching under our feet. The silence between us was thick, but not entirely hostile. I unlocked my car and turned to face him. The setting sun cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the new lines and sagging skin. The library, he said abruptly, his voice gruff. We put the books in storage. In the boathouse, there, safe. I blinked, completely thrown. Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. Thank you for telling me. I managed. He looked out at the lake, unable to hold my gaze. Your grandmother. She loved this place. She loved you, he swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. She'd be glad you fought for it. It was the closest I would ever get to an apology, the closest he would ever come to acknowledging that I was right. It wasn't much, but for Richard Wilson, it was a seismic shift. I know, I said softly. He gave another one of his signature nods, then turned and walked back toward the house without another word, his shoulders slightly stooped. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt quiet. A chapter, one I didn't even know was still open, had finally been closed. The following months saw a subtle, strange shift in the family dynamic. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was more like a ceasefire, a mutual agreement to occupy the same planet without launching missiles. Nathan and I continued our coffees. He reported that after the gathering, my parents had a huge fight. Their last, big, dramatic blowout. Apparently, my mother had accused my father of siding with me by mentioning the books. My father, for the first time, had apparently shouted back, "For God's sake, Elaine, let it go. The girl beat us." Fair and square, the girl, not Charmaine, but beat us from him. That was a staggering admission of defeat and of a twisted form of respect. My mother, according to Nathan, went quiet after that. The fight seemed to have taken the wind out of her sails. The constant social climbing seemed slow. She was quieter, less present. I focused on my own life. I started seeing someone, a history professor named Ben I'd met at a bookstore. It was easy, uncomplicated. He knew nothing about my family drama, and I found I didn't feel the need to unload it on him immediately. I was just Charmaine, the software developer who loved books and bad sci-fi movies. It was liberating. About 6 months after the Vermont gathering, Nathan called. His voice was strained. "It's Dad," he said. "He's in the hospital. Nothing critical, they say. Severe exhaustion, dehydration. The doctor says his body just shut down for a bit, stress related." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Which hospital? I drove there, my mind a whirlwind. This wasn't part of the script. The script was them living their lives and me living mine, parallel but separate. Sickness blurred the lines. I found Nathan in the waiting room. He looked tired. He's asleep. They're giving him fluids. Mom's in with him. As if on cue, the door to the room opened and my mother stepped out. She looked small. Her makeup was faintly smudged. Her designer clothes looked rumpled. She saw me, and for a moment her mask was completely gone. I saw pure, unadulterated fear. "Charmaine," she whispered. "Is he okay?" I asked. "The doctor says he needs to rest," she said, her voice trembling slightly. He just collapsed at his desk. We stood there, the three of us in the sterile, bright hallway. The Wilson family, united by a hospital crisis. I'll get some coffee," Nathan said, tactfully leaving us alone. My mother and I stood in silence. The hum of the hospital was the only sound. "He works too hard," she said finally, not looking at me. "He always has, but now there's no one to help him, not really." It was the closest she would ever come to admitting that my role had been real, that I had helped. "Nathan helps," I said, defending him. "Nathan tries. She corrected softly, "It's not the same." I had no response to that. I went into the room. My father looked frail in the hospital bed, swallowed by the sheets and wires. The powerful Richard Wilson was reduced to a sleeping, vulnerable old man. I felt a profound sadness, not for the man he was, but for the man he could have been, for the relationship we never had. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They landed on me, and for a moment there was confusion, then recognition. "Charmaine," his voice was raspy. "I'm here," I said, and it was a simple statement of fact. He closed his eyes again. "Good," he murmured, almost to himself. "You were always good in a crisis." Then he fell back asleep. I left the hospital that day with a new understanding. The war was over. There were no winners, only survivors, all of us bearing scars. My parents were not villains in a story. They were flawed, broken people who had passed their brokenness onto their children. Nathan was fighting his way out of it. I had fought my way out of it. My father came home from the hospital 2 days later. His doctor mandated a less stressful lifestyle. Actual retirement. He listened. The next chapter began slowly, tentatively. I started having monthly phone calls with my father. They were short, awkward at first. He'd ask about work. I'd give him brief, technical updates he only half understood. Then, strangely, he started asking about my cottage, about the repairs I was doing. It was a safe, neutral topic. We could talk about wood rot and roofing materials without the weight of our history. It was through these calls I learned he'd started going to the cabin most weeks. Not to work, but to putter. He was fixing things, small things Arthur hadn't gotten to. He was, in his own clumsy way, trying to care for the place for its own sake, not as a status symbol. One Sunday afternoon, my phone rang. It was my father. "The plumbing in the boathouse is leaking." He said without preamble, "Arthur's away. Do you know a good plumber in the area?" I almost laughed. He was asking me for a contractor. It was such a mundane, normal thing. "I don't, but I can find one." I said, "I'll text you the number." "All right." A pause. "Thank you." It was another small crack. A tiny bridge being built over the chasm, not to cross it, but just to acknowledge it was there. My relationship with my mother remained distant. She sent a birthday card that year. It was generic, store, bought, signed simply, "Love, Mother." It was a massive step down from her usual lavish, handwritten notes, but it felt more honest. The word love was just a word, but the effort to send it was something. I saw them next at Nathan's wedding. He married a lovely, no-nonsense woman named Maria he'd met in his recovery program. It was a small, simple ceremony in a garden. I went with Ben. My mother was polite to Ben, distant but polite. My father shook his hand and asked him about the Peloponnesian War, which was his idea of small talk. It was awkward, but it wasn't painful. At one point during the reception, I found myself standing next to my mother, watching Nathan and Maria dance. They looked happy, real. "He looks happy," I said. "She's good for him," my mother replied. Then, after a moment, she added, Ben seems intelligent." It was the best she could do, and for the first time I accepted it as enough. I didn't need her approval. Her faint, begrudging acknowledgement was just that, a faint, begrudging acknowledgement. It had no power to lift me up, and therefore no power to tear me down. "He is," I said simply. And we stood there, side by side, not as mother and daughter, but as two women who shared a complicated history, watching her son, my brother, dance at his wedding. On the drive home, Ben, who had been quiet, took my hand. "They're just people, you know," he said softly. I looked at him. "What do you mean? Your parents. I know the stories. I know what they put you through, but watching them today, they're just two old, tired people who don't seem to know how to talk to their own children. It's kind of sad." And he was right. The monsters of my childhood had shrunk down to human size. They were just people, flawed, limited, and ultimately not the center of my universe anymore. The final piece of my healing fell into place about 3 years after the brunch. My father called me. His voice was different, softer. "I'm at the cabin," he said, "in the library. I had Arthur bring some of the books back from the boathouse. Your grandmother's favorites, I thought. You might want to see it." I drove up the following weekend. The leaves were just beginning to turn. When I arrived, my father was waiting for me on the porch. He led me inside to the library. It wasn't the library of my childhood, full and bustling, but it wasn't the barren room slated for demolition either. A dozen or so boxes were stacked against one wall, but on the shelves that remained, a collection of books stood. I recognized them immediately. My grandmother's collection of Robert Frost poetry, her old leather-bound encyclopedias, the complete works of Jane Austen I'd read as a teenager. "It's not everything," he said, his hands in his pockets, "but it's a start." I ran my fingers over the spine of Pride and Prejudice. "Thank you, Father," he nodded. We stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the ghosts of books and the memory of a woman who had, for a short time, made me feel seen. "I was wrong," he said, the words quiet but clear in the still room. I turned to look at him. He was staring out the window at the lake. "About a great many things," he continued. "But especially about you. I thought your precision, your mind, was a tool, something to be utilized. I didn't see that it was the core of you, your strength. I treated it as a convenience, and I neglected the rest." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a regret so deep it was almost tangible. "I can't change the past, Charmaine. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness I haven't earned, but I am sorry for my part in it." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of release. This was the moment I had waited for my entire life, and now that it was here, I realized I didn't need it anymore. His apology wasn't for me, it was for him, a burden he needed to put down. "I know," I said, "I know you are." And that was all that needed to be said. We didn't hug. We didn't have a dramatic reconciliation. We just stood there, in the library my grandmother had left for me, in the peace of a truce that had been hard. One, I still see them, but infrequently. Holidays sometimes, a birthday dinner. The interactions are still a little stilted, a little careful. But the poison is gone. The desperate need for something from them is gone. My life is my own. My story is my own. The chapter titled Family no longer defines the entire book. It's just one part of a much larger, richer narrative that I am writing for myself, one day at a time. The little girl in the pale blue bedroom, the valedictorian with the perfect scores, the woman sipping coffee while her world was shattered. She's still a part of me, but she's not all of me. I am Charmaine. I am a director, a partner, a friend, a homeowner. I am a woman who learned that the strongest families are sometimes the ones you build, not the ones you're born into. And I am a woman who learned that the most powerful word in the English language isn't love or success. It's no. And the second most powerful is enough. I have had enough. I have done enough. I am enough. And that, finally, is everything. There is a strange peace that comes after a long war ends. The landscape is forever changed, scarred by trenches and fallen fortifications, but the relentless shelling has stopped. The air is clear. You can finally hear yourself think. For the first year after my father's apology in the library, that's what life felt like. A quiet, watchful peace. My relationship with my parents settled into something I can only describe as a diplomatic détente. We were like two neighboring countries with a violent history, now maintaining polite, carefully regulated borders. Monthly phone calls with my father became a ritual. We talked about the cabin's new roof, the fluctuating stock market in a detached, academic way, and the books he was slowly returning to the library shelves. It was surface level, but it was consistent, and most importantly, it was safe. My mother remained the greater enigma. She sent a Christmas gift that year, a cashmere scarf in a color I actually liked. The card read, "Thinking of you this season, Mother. No demands, no criticisms, just a scarf." It felt like a white flag waved from a great distance. I was building a life with Ben, the history professor. It was refreshingly normal. We cooked dinners together, argued about movies, and spent lazy Sundays reading side by side. He was steady, kind, and entirely separate from the tectonic drama of my family. With him, I wasn't the difficult one, or the successful one. I was just Charmaine. It was the greatest gift he could have given me. The first real test of this new piece came about 18 months after the library apology. Nathan called, his voice tight with a familiar, old anxiety. "Mom's in the hospital," he said without preamble. "She fainted at a charity luncheon." A cold knot, one I thought had permanently loosened, tightened in my stomach. "What's wrong?" "They're running tests. Dehydration, they think, at first. But it's Mom. She never just faints." I drove to the hospital, the same one my father had been in. The sense of déjà vu was unnerving. I found Nathan and my father in the same waiting room, a place that was becoming tragically familiar. My father looked up as I approached. His eyes, which had regained some of their old steel, now held a new fear. "Charmaine," he said, and the way he said my name was different. It wasn't a statement or a greeting. It was an acknowledgement of my presence in a moment of crisis. I was included, not out of pity, but by right. "What did the doctors say?" I asked, sitting beside him. "They're doing a CT scan," Nathan said. "They found she's severely anemic, but they want to rule out other things." The unspoken word hung in the air between us: cancer. My mother, Elaine Wilson, had always been a force of will. She curated her body with the same ruthless precision she curated her social circle. The idea of that will being undermined by something as mundane and vicious as a disease felt wrong. When the doctor finally emerged, his face was unreadable. "She's stable. The fainting was due to the anemia. The CT scan is clear." We all let out a collective breath we didn't realize we'd been holding. "However," the doctor continued, and our relief instantly curdled back into dread, "the anemia is a symptom. We've diagnosed her with Crohn's disease. It's a chronic inflammatory condition of the digestive tract. It's what's been causing the anemia, the weight loss, the fatigue. Crohn's." My father repeated, bewildered. This was not a foe he could intimidate or outnegotiate. "It's manageable with medication and lifestyle changes," the doctor explained gently, "but it will require significant adjustment. She's going to need a lot of support." We were allowed to see her. She was propped up in the hospital bed, dwarfed by the pillows. The veneer of invincibility was gone, stripped away by illness and the stark hospital lighting. She looked small and terrified. Her eyes found mine, and for a second, the old defiance flickered. "I suppose you're here to see the spectacle," she whispered, her voice weak. The old me would have flinched. The new me just pulled up a chair. "I'm here because you're in the hospital, Mother." She looked away, out the window. A digestive disease, how? Undignified. And in that moment, I understood her in a way I never had before. Her entire life had been a performance for an invisible audience. Every detail, from the pearls to the party planning, was about controlling the narrative. Sickness was messy. It was unpredictable. It was, in her world, the ultimate failure of presentation. Her illness became the unexpected catalyst that redefined our relationship. It forced a new kind of proximity, one based not on obligation or drama, but on simple, practical care. My father was lost. He could manage a corporate merger, but he was helpless in the face of a specialized diet and a complex medication schedule. Nathan tried, but he was building his new life with Maria. So, quietly, without fanfare, I stepped in, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as a competent adult who could manage a crisis. I researched Crohn's disease until I understood it better than most general practitioners. I found her a specialist in Boston. I sat with her during her appointments, taking notes, asking the questions my father was too proud and too frightened to ask. I became her advocate. The first time I brought her a meal from the specific, bland diet plan her nutritionist had designed, she stared at the container as if it were a foreign object. "You cooked this?" she asked. I followed a recipe, I said simply. She took a tentative bite. She said nothing, but she ate it all. It was in these small, quiet moments that the walls began to crumble. There was no grand confession, no tearful reconciliation. It was in the way she'd let me help her sort her weekly medication into a pill organizer. It was in the way she stopped criticizing my clothes and started asking hesitantly about my work. One afternoon, as I was driving her home from an infusion appointment, she was quiet, watching the world go by outside the window. The steroids made her puffy and tired. "You're very good at this," she said softly, almost to herself. "Good at what? Taking charge, organizing, you always were." She paused. I used to find it threatening. I kept my eyes on the road, my hands steady on the wheel. "I know. I thought if I acknowledged it, it would mean I wasn't needed," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't have anything else, you see, not like your father with his business. My world was. The house, the parties, the image. You were so capable, you didn't need my world, and that felt like a rejection." It was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. It wasn't an apology for the cruelty, but an explanation of the fear that drove it. For the first time, I saw my mother not as a monster, but as a deeply insecure woman who had built a gilded cage for herself and then mistaken it for a throne. "I always needed a mother," I said, my voice equally quiet. "I just didn't need a curator." She was silent for the rest of the drive, but when I helped her into the house, she didn't let go of my arm right away. She gave it a small, almost imperceptible squeeze. "Thank you, Charmaine." It was a start. While my relationship with my mother was being slowly, painstakingly rewired, my life with Ben was progressing in a warm, linear fashion. He moved into my Cambridge apartment, bringing with him a chaotic collection of history books that happily colonized my orderly shelves. We talked about marriage in the abstract, comfortable way you discuss a future vacation. The catalyst, ironically, came from my father. Ben and I had been invited to the Vermont cabin for a weekend. A first. It was my father's idea. He wanted to show Ben the proper way to split wood, a ritual I think he believed all men needed to undergo. We were there, all five of us, my parents, Nathan, Ben, and me. It was still a little stiff, but the undercurrent of hostility was gone, replaced by a cautious, collective effort. On the second night, we were all sitting on the porch after dinner. My mother, wrapped in a blanket, was actually smiling at something Ben said. My father was nursing a single whiskey, looking more at ease than I'd ever seen him. Nathan was telling a story about Maria. My father turned to Ben. "So, Ben, what are your intentions with my daughter?" The porch went silent. My mother sucked in a sharp breath. Nathan looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. It was the kind of blunt, outdated question I would have once found infuriatingly patriarchal. But Ben, being Ben, just smiled. He took my hand. "Well, sir," he said, his tone respectful but firm, "my intention is to love and support her for the rest of my life. I was planning to discuss the formalities of that with her first, but since you asked, I'd like to marry her." My father looked from Ben to me, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. It was a smile I had seen so rarely, it felt like a historical event. "Good," he grunted, "that's good." Later that night, as Ben and I were getting ready for bed in the guest room, I looked at him. "You know you didn't have to answer him like that. His approval isn't required." "I know," Ben said, pulling me into his arms. "But it's not about his approval. It's about stating my intentions to the world, and he's a part of your world, however complicated that is. I'm not asking for his permission. I'm giving him my respect." A month later, on the dock of my New Hampshire cottage, under a blanket of stars, Ben did it properly. He got down on one knee and asked me to marry him. I said yes without a single moment of hesitation. Planning the wedding was the final, unexpected crucible for my rebuilt family. My mother, of course, immediately tried to launch into full-scale production mode. A ballroom at the plaza, 500 guests, a 10-tier cake. I shut it down gently but firmly. "No, Mother, we're having it here, at the cottage. Just family and close friends." I expected a fight. I expected tears, accusations of ruining her one chance to host a proper society wedding. She just sighed, a long, weary sound. "I suppose a small, lakeside wedding could be elegant," she conceded, and then, To my utter astonishment, she asked, "What can I do to help?" So, my mother, the former beauty queen and social climber, helped me plan my small, rustic wedding. She used her legendary organizational skills for good, coordinating with florists and caterers within my budget and vision. She didn't try to take over, she assisted. It was nothing short of miraculous. My father, in his own way, participated too. He insisted on paying for the entire thing, not as a display of wealth, but as a gift. "Let me do this," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I accepted, recognizing it as his language of love. The day of the wedding was perfect, simple, real. I wore a simple ivory sheath dress. Ben wore a linen suit. We stood under a birch, wood arbor my father and Nathan had built together, overlooking the lake. My mother walked me down the path. Her arm was linked through mine, and her grip was firm. She didn't cry, but her eyes were bright. "You look happy," she said, just before we reached Ben. "I am," I said. And I was. My father gave a toast at the reception, which was held in my backyard under strings of fairy lights. He stood, glass in hand, and looked out at the small crowd of my chosen family and his. "I'm not a man of many words," he began, and a few of my friends chuckled softly. "I've spent my life building things, companies, properties, a reputation." He paused, his gaze finding mine. "But the most important thing I ever had a hand in building is my daughter, Charmaine. Though, to be honest, she built herself. I just provided some of the materials, and occasionally some of the obstacles." A ripple of understanding laughter went through the crowd. "She is the strongest, most capable person I know," he continued, his voice thickening slightly. "Ben, you're a lucky man. Take care of our girl." He raised his glass to Charmaine and Ben. It wasn't a poetic speech, but it was the truth. And from him, it was everything. The wedding was a line in the sand. On one side was the past, with all its pain and complexity. On the other was the future. A year after the wedding, Ben and I found out I was pregnant. The news filled me with a joy so profound it was almost terrifying. But it also brought back a flood of old fears. What kind of mother would I be? Would the ghosts of my own childhood haunt my parenting? I shared these fears with Dr. Reed. "The fact that you're worried about it is the best possible sign," she said. "You're breaking the cycle. You're conscious of the patterns. That's the first and most important step." I told my parents together, over a quiet dinner at their house. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. For a moment she was speechless. Then tears welled in her eyes. Real, uncalculated tears. "A baby," she whispered. "Oh, Charmaine." My father reached over and put his hand over mine on the table. A simple, warm, grounding pressure. "Congratulations," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's wonderful news." And my mother became unexpectedly gentle. The old, critical edge was replaced by a genuine, almost shy curiosity. She bought me books about pregnancy, but not the demanding, prescriptive ones she would have chosen before. They were gentle, holistic guides. She called me every week, not to offer unsolicited advice, but to ask, "How are you feeling?" It was during my second trimester that she gave me a gift. It was a small, worn velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver rattle. It was tarnished with age. "This was yours," she said. "Your grandmother gave it to you when you were born. I put it away. I thought it was too simple, not grand enough. I wanted you to have gold, crystal, something impressive." She shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "But this was the one you always reached for. You loved the sound it made." I held the tiny rattle in my hand. It was a relic from a time before the expectations, before the disappointment, a token from a mother to a daughter, given with simple love. "Thank you, Mom," I said. It was the first time I'd called her that in over a decade. She reached out and touched my cheek, her fingers cool and soft. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," she said. And I believed her. My daughter, Elise, named for my grandmother, was born on a bright spring morning. The moment they placed her on my chest, a love so fierce and unconditional washed over me that it erased every last shadow of doubt. This was my family. This was my purpose. My parents came to the hospital. My father held his granddaughter with a look of such stunned, reverent awe that it made me cry. My mother didn't try to take her. She just stood beside him, one hand on his arm, her eyes shining as she looked at the baby, then at me. "Well done, my dear," she said softly. "Well done. The story doesn't end there, of course. Life never does." Elise is too now, a whirlwind of laughter and stubbornness. My father is her devoted papa, who reads her the same Robert Frost poems his mother loved. My mother is Nana, who brings her beautifully illustrated books and has, to everyone's astonishment, completely given up on criticizing anyone's life choices. She seems too content for that now. Nathan and Maria have a son, a year older than Elise. The cousins are growing up together, their relationship untainted by the dynamics that plagued their father and me. We have family picnics. They are noisy, messy, and filled with a genuine, unforced joy I once thought was impossible for us. I still have my career, I still have my cottage, I still have the library in Vermont now fully restored where I take Elise to read. The systems I built for my family are long since dismantled, replaced by professional managers. I am no longer their administrator, I am simply their daughter, their sister. The journey from that brunch table to this life was longer and more winding than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about transformation. I had to become strong enough to walk away, and then, much later, I had to become wise enough to decide what, if anything, to walk back toward. The wounds are still there. Some days an old memory will surface and the scar will ache, but the bleeding stopped a long time ago. I look at my daughter, at the pure, uncomplicated love in her eyes when she looks at me, and I know that the cycle has been broken. The story she will tell one day will be different from mine, and that is the greatest victory of all. The script they wrote for me was full of pain and obligation. The life I wrote for myself is filled with love, chosen and given freely. It is not a perfect life, but it is my life, and it is finally enough. There is a profound difference between the peace of a battlefield after the fighting has stopped and the rich, deep quiet of a forest that has never known war. For the first few years after Elise's birth, our family lived in the former. We were careful with each other, navigating around the crater holes and buried shrapnel of our past. But as Elise grew from a baby into a little girl, something began to shift. The landscape itself started to heal. The grass grew over the scars. The careful détente began to feel less like a negotiated settlement and more like just family. Elise was the sun around which our solar system recalibrated. She was a force of pure, unbiased love. To her, my father wasn't the intimidating Richard Wilson. He was Papa, the man who let her help in his workshop, handing her harmless pieces of sandpaper while he carefully restored an old rocking horse for her. My mother wasn't the critical socialite Elaine. She was Nana, who spoke to her in a soft, sing-song voice I barely recognized, and who never, ever commented on the state of her clothes after a session with finger paints. Ben and I settled into the beautiful, exhausting rhythm of parenthood. My career continued to thrive, but my ambition had mellowed. I no longer needed to prove my worth through professional conquests. My worth was now a settled fact, confirmed every night when I rayed good night moon to a sleepy child curled against my side. The first real sign that our new dynamic was being stress-tested and would hold came when Elise was 4. My father, now fully and to my continued surprise contentedly retired, decided the Vermont cabin needed a proper treehouse for his granddaughter. This was a monumental undertaking. The Richard Wilson of old would have hired a team of architects and contractors. This version of my father bought books on treehouse construction and spent weeks sketching plans at the kitchen table, often with Elise perched on his knee, adding her own crayon embellishments. He and Nathan were going to build it themselves. This was the other miracle. The chasm between my father and brother had been bridged not by a dramatic confrontation, but by shared purpose and a shared love for a little girl. Nathan, with his hard, won humility and patience, was the perfect counterbalance to my father's old, school, sometimes impatient, precision. I drove up with Elise one weekend to see the progress. The structure was taking shape, nestled securely in the sturdy arms of a massive oak tree. It was more than a tree house. It was a small castle with a pulley system for a bucket and a flagpole waiting for a flag. I found my father sitting on an upturned bucket, staring at a complex looking joint he was trying to fit together. He looked frustrated. "Everything okay, Dad?" I asked. He grunted, not looking up. "The angle is off by a fraction of a degree. It throws the entire support structure out of alignment." It was such a classic Richard Wilson statement. The pursuit of perfection, the intolerance for error. The old me would have felt a familiar pang of anxiety, remembering all the times a fraction of a degree off in my own life had earned me a look of cold dismissal. But before I could say anything, Nathan came down the ladder. He saw the look on our father's face and sighed good-naturedly. "Dad, it's a treehouse, not a skyscraper. It's fine. It's more than fine. It's great." "It is not fine," my father retorted, his voice tight. "It's structurally compromised. Let me see," Nathan said, kneeling down. He examined the joint, then looked back at our father. "Okay, you're right. The angle is off. So, we have two choices. We can spend the next 3 hours trying to shave it down to perfection, or we can add a second brace here," he said, pointing to a spot a few inches away, "and it'll be twice as strong, and we can finish the roof before the rain comes this afternoon." My father stared at him. I held my breath. This was a pivotal moment. The old paradigm, Nathan's mediocrity versus my father's excellence, was being challenged. My father looked from the joint to Nathan's calm, confident face. Then he looked up at the treehouse, where Elise was eagerly waiting on the deck. He let out a long, slow breath. "Show me where to put the brace," he said. It was a surrender, but not a surrender of his standards, a surrender of his need for total, solitary control. He was accepting help. He was accepting a different kind of solution. In that moment, watching my brother teach my father how to be flexible, I felt the last of my own resentment towards both of them finally dissolve. They were just two men trying to build a treehouse for a little girl they loved. The treehouse was completed that weekend. It was, of course, the most over-engineered, structurally sound treehouse in the history of New England, but it was also filled with laughter. We had a picnic inside it, and my father, with Elise on his lap, looked out over the lake with an expression of pure, unadulterated contentment. The drive for perfection had been replaced by the satisfaction of creation. My mother's transformation was quieter, but no less profound. Her illness had forced a kind of humility upon her, but it was grandmotherhood that unlocked a softness I never knew she possessed. She sold the sprawling colonial house in Fairfield. "It was too big, too full of ghosts," she said. She and my father bought a comfortable, modern condo in a nice Boston neighborhood, close to us and to Nathan and his family. The day the Fairfield house sold, my mother asked me to come over to the condo. She had a few boxes she wanted to go through with me. One box was filled with photo albums, not the formal, professional portraits that had graced the coffee tables of my childhood, but candid snapshots. There I was, a gap-toothed 7-year-old, covered in mud and grinning. There was Nathan, asleep on the sofa with a dog I'd forgotten we'd ever had. I was so busy staging our life. She said, her finger tracing the image of my muddy face, that I forgot to live it. I was always worried about what came next. The next party, the next school year, the next social milestone. I missed all of this. She opened another box. It was filled with my old things, report cards, art projects, stories I'd written. I kept it all, she admitted, a little sheepishly. Even when I was criticizing you for not being enough, I was secretly saving every scrap of paper that proved you were extraordinary. She pulled out a short story I'd written in the 3rd grade. You were always such a good writer, so precise with your words. Why did you never tell me that? I asked, my throat tight. She looked away, her eyes glistening. I think I believed that if I acknowledged your strengths, you would fly too high too fast and I would be left behind. It was a terrible small way to think. I am so sorry, Charmaine, for all of it. It wasn't the first time I'd heard an apology, but it was the first time it felt complete. It wasn't just about specific incidents. It was an apology for the entire climate of my childhood. "It's okay, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. The weight of it was gone. I had carried it for so long, I barely noticed the ache until it lifted. The final piece of my own healing came from an unexpected direction, Nathan. Our relationship had become one of the steadiest in my life. Our monthly coffees were a touchstone, but one day he asked if we could meet at a park instead. He seemed agitated. We found a bench overlooking a pond. He didn't speak for a long time, just watched the ducks. "Maria's pregnant." He finally said, "That's wonderful news," I said, reaching for his hand. But his expression was grim. It's just." He ran a hand through his hair. "It's bringing everything up. All the stuff about our childhood. The way Dad was with me. The enabling. I'm terrified, Charmaine. What if I do the same thing? What if I create another Nathan? A kid who thinks he can skate by because Dad will always bail him out." I looked at my brother, really looked at him. The fear in his eyes was raw and familiar. It was the same fear I'd felt when I was pregnant with Elise. "Nathan," I said gently, "the fact that you're this scared is your first and best insurance policy. You are not the same person you were. You have sobriety. You have self-awareness. You have a partner who won't let you get away with that stuff. You're going to be a great dad because you know what not to do." He let out a shaky breath. "But what about the good stuff, Mom and Dad? They weren't all bad. There were good times. How do I hold on to those without repeating the bad?" It was the most insightful question he had ever asked me. "You take the good," I said, thinking of the treehouse, of my mother saving my stories. "You acknowledge it, you cherish it, and you make a conscious choice to do the bad parts differently. You build a new family culture, brick by brick. You and Maria, you make your own rules." He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. "Our own rules. I like that." When Nathan and Maria's son, Leo, was born, it was a celebration for all of us. My father had a second grandson to dote on. My mother had a new soul to be gentle with. And I watched my brother become the father I knew he could be, present, patient, and fiercely protective of his son's emotional world. With both of her children now parents themselves, my mother found a new, quiet purpose. She started a grandmother's group at the local library, reading to children every Tuesday. The former queen of the charity gala now found her greatest joy in the simple act of holding a picture book, her voice bringing stories to life for a circle of rapt toddlers. The performance was finally over. She was just Elaine, and that was enough. The years continued to turn. Elise started kindergarten. My father taught her how to chess, and to my immense amusement, she beat him soundly within a year. Her logical little mind a perfect match for the game. He didn't mind losing. He beamed with pride. Ben received a prestigious fellowship that required us to spend a year in Oxford, England. It was a huge opportunity, but the thought of uprooting our family, of being so far from the fragile, beautiful ecosystem we had built, filled me with anxiety. I brought my fears to my parents. To my surprise, they were both completely supportive. "Charmaine, you have to go." My mother said, her voice firm, "It's a marvelous opportunity for Ben and for you, an adventure, but a whole year with a 5-year-old. Children are resilient." My father said, "And we have these marvelous new video call devices. We'll see you every week. It will be an education for all of us." Their unwavering support was the final confirmation that the transformation was real. The parents who had once tried to clip my wings were now the ones urging me to fly. The year in Oxford was magical. It was a time for Ben, Elise, and me to be a self-contained unit, exploring castles and museums, navigating a new culture together. And every Sunday, without fail, we would have a video call with Nana and Papa. They would listen to Elise's stories about her new school, her new friends. They were a constant, loving presence from across the ocean. When we returned, tanned and filled with stories, it felt like coming home in the truest sense. The peace was no longer the peace after a war. It was the deep, ancient quiet of the forest. It was rooted. It was resilient. Last month, we all gathered at the Vermont cabin for Elise's 7th birthday. It was a riotous affair. Leo, now a toddling whirlwind, chased bubbles on the lawn. My father manned the grill, something the Richard Wilson of old would have considered beneath him. My mother and Maria were laughing in the kitchen, preparing a salad. I stood on the porch, watching the scene. Ben came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "You did this, you know," he murmured. "I didn't do it alone," I said, leaning back into him. "But you started it. You built the first bridge. You showed them it was possible to be different." I watched as my father lifted a squealing Elise onto his shoulders. I saw my mother look up from the kitchen window and smile at the sight. I saw Nathan gently redirect Leo from eating a fistful of sand. They had all done the work. They had all chosen to change, but Ben was right. I had to be the one to draw the line in the sand. I had to be the one to prove that my love for myself was greater than my need for their approval. The story that began with a cruel comment over brunch had not ended with a dramatic victory. It had evolved into something much richer and more complex. It had become a story about the slow, stubborn power of forgiveness, not just forgiving them, but forgiving myself for the years I spent believing I was the problem. The little girl in the pale blue bedroom is now a woman with a daughter of her own, a woman who knows her own worth. The valedictorian is now a director who leads with empathy. The woman who sipped her coffee and smiled as her world shattered had, piece by piece, built a new one. A better one, and as I stood there, surrounded by the messy, beautiful, imperfect family we had all worked so hard to become, I knew one thing for certain. The story wasn't about the ending, it was about the journey. And mine, finally, was happy. If the first few years of peace felt like the quiet after a storm, and the years after Elise's birth felt like a forest regrooving, then this new era felt like the first harvest. The work of tilling the soil and planting the seeds was done. Now we were gathering the fruits, sometimes sweet, sometimes tart, but always nourishing. Elise at 7 was a whirlwind of fierce opinions and a startling, innate sense of justice. She had inherited my logical mind and Ben's compassionate heart, a combination that made her a formidable negotiator for later bedtimes and a fierce defender of the underdog on the playground. It was this sense of justice that triggered the next, subtle shift in our family tapestry. We were at my parents' condo for a Friday night dinner, a new tradition that had become the bedrock of our week. Elise was showing Nana and Papa a drawing she'd made at school. "It's a family tree," she announced, spreading the large sheet of paper on the coffee table. There we all were in her charming stick figure style, Ben and me, Nana and Papa, Uncle Nathan, Aunt Maria, and Cousin Leo. Lines connected us all. My mother pointed to a figure next to Papa, with yellow crayon hair and a triangle dress. "And who is this lovely one, darling?" "That's you, Nana," Elise said, giggling. "Oh, of course," my mother said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She traced the line connecting her to my father, then the lines connecting them to Nathan and me. "It's perfect," but later, as I was helping her clear the dessert plates, she was quiet. "Everything okay, Mom?" I asked. She looked toward the living room, where Elise was now demonstrating a complex dance routine to my bemused father. "It's just her picture," she said softly. "It's so complete, as if our family sprang into existence fully formed, right there on the page." She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "It doesn't show any of the branches that were pruned away." I knew what she meant. There was no mention of her own parents, who had passed when I was young, and whom she rarely spoke of. No aunts, uncles, or cousins from her side. My father's family was similarly absent. Our family tree, in Elise's drawing, was a sturdy, solitary oak with no surrounding forest. "She's 7, I said gently. "She's just drawing the people she knows." "I know," my mother sighed. It just made me realize I let so much of it die, my own history. I was so focused on building the Wilson dynasty, on creating this perfect, self-contained unit, that I severed the roots. I didn't want any complications. This was a new level of introspection for her. The illness had humbled her, grandmotherhood had softened her, but now, facing the simple honesty of a child's drawing, she was confronting the legacy of her own choices. A few weeks later, she asked for my help. She wanted to put together a real family tree for Elise. Not just names and dates, but stories. She dug out old, dusty photo albums from a storage unit, pictures of her as a girl in Virginia, of her beautiful, stern mother, of a father I had never met who had a kind, crinkled smile. As we sat at her dining table, the ghosts of her past spread out before us. She began to talk. She told me stories I'd never heard, about her mother's relentless pressure for her to be a somebody, about the loneliness of being valued only for her looks, about the desperate need to escape that had led her to my father, not out of grand passion, but as a strategic alliance toward a more powerful life. I recreated my own childhood, didn't I? She said, her voice thick with a regret so deep it seemed to have no bottom. I did to you what my mother did to me, just in a different flavor. I took her hand. It felt fragile in mine. You stopped, Mom. I said, that's the part that matters. You broke the cycle. For Elise, for Leo, you changed the pattern. A single tear traced a path through her carefully applied powder. I suppose I did. She whispered, a little late. It's never too late. I said, and I meant it. This project became her new obsession. She started writing down her memories in a beautiful leather-bound journal. She reached out to a second cousin she hadn't spoken to in 40 years. It was as if, having finally connected with the family she had, she now felt brave enough to reconnect with the family she'd left behind. While my mother was delving into the past, my father was embracing the present with a vigor I found both amusing and touching. He had become a fixture at Elise's soccer games, not as the aloof executive, but as the loudest, most enthusiastic grandparent on the sidelines. He didn't know the rules, but he cheered for every kick, every attempt, with the same fervor he'd once reserved for closing multi-million-dollar deals. One Saturday, after a game where Elise's team had lost 5-0, she was dejected, sitting on the bench with her head in her hands. My father sat down beside her, putting a steadying arm around her small shoulders. You know what I saw out there today, he said, his voice low and serious, that we were terrible. Elise mumbled into her knees. No, he said. I saw a player who never gave up. I saw number 7. That's you, running back to defend even when the ball was at the other end of the field. I saw you helping up a player from the other team when she fell. That, my dear Elise, is called character, and character, he said, tapping her gently on the chest, is worth 100 goals. Elise looked up at him, her eyes wide. Really, Papa, really, he said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. Winning is temporary. Character is forever. I'm prouder of you today than I would be if you'd scored 10 goals. I stood a few feet away, my throat tight. This was the man who had once told me that excellence was expected, the man who had viewed my achievements as baseline requirements, and here he was, teaching my daughter about the intrinsic value of effort and kindness. He wasn't just a changed man, he was a better one. This new version of my father was also having a profound effect on Nathan. With the pressure to perform and inherit the Wilson legacy finally gone, Nathan's own talents began to flourish in unexpected ways. He had left the insurance company and, with Maria's encouragement, started his own small business, a service that organized and led outdoor adventure trips for corporate teams. It leveraged his natural, easygoing charm and his hard-won understanding of teamwork and resilience. He came to me one day, nervous, with a business plan. I know it's not software development, he said, almost apologetically. It's not, you know, intellectually rigorous. I scanned the document. It was well-researched, thoughtful, and filled with a genuine passion. Nathan, this is brilliant, I said, meaning it. This is completely you. It's using your real gifts. Dad will be thrilled. He looked skeptical. You think? I know. I said. He was right to be nervous. The old Richard Wilson would have scoffed at a guide service. This new one listened intently, as Nathan pitched the idea over Sunday dinner. He asked sharp, practical questions about liability, insurance, and marketing channels, but they were questions from a place of wanting to help, not to criticize. When Nathan finished, my father nodded slowly. "It's a solid plan," he declared. "You've identified a niche. Your personal story is your greatest asset. People will trust you." He raised his glass. "I'll make some calls. I know a few people at firms that could use this." It wasn't a blank check. It was better. It was a vote of confidence. It was my father using his network not to create a nepotistic sinecure for his son, but to help launch a legitimate, passion-driven venture. Nathan looked like he'd been given the keys to a kingdom.